Chuck. He's going to talk to us about holiday beers. Let me get your slides up.
All right. So this is one of my favorite times of the year for beer, that's for sure. And it's time for us to get warmer, so we're gonna share some beers. Okay. All right. So I stole this template from Brian Trout, so hopefully he doesn't know. But all right, so we're going to talk about the history of holiday beers, a little bit about the characteristics, the styles, some examples, ingredients in the brewing process, recipe example, a few goofy photos from when I brewed, and a special surprise, and then any questions. So the term winter warmer really comes from the British brewing tradition. They would often produce a warmer or a stronger beer in the winter and fuller in flavor. And probably one of the most well-known examples of that is Samuel Smith's Winter Welcome. Came to the United States in the 90s, and for a lot of us, it's just a classic. It's just a strong British ale. Winter season offerings come from almost every nation. There's a variety of different things that happen around the world, but it's always typically a stronger beer. Sometimes it's hopped a little bit differently. It may be a darker beer like a stout. Spices are very common in winter beers. And it could be a strong, rich lager, especially like a double bock from Germany. And I think it's time for us to start with the first example. So for each of the examples that we're going to taste tonight, I went onto the web and found what they say about their beer. And it's very interesting how sometimes they're pretty vague in what they do or how they make the beer or what the ingredients are, and other times they're very specific. So you'll see here, there's not a whole lot here. It's an English strong ale, as I mentioned. Yorkshire is the oldest brewery in, or at least Sam Smith's is the oldest brewery in Yorkshire. The beer is fermented in the famous Yorkshire squares, which are like these concrete squares, I guess they are, and it's an open fermentation. They say it has a luxurious malt character, obviously Fuggle and Golding hops. I think the best part was it said it should be contemplated before an open fire. But this is definitely one of the classics, and I need to make sure that I get a taste of that too when we get a chance. No, I don't have a cup. Thanks. So we'll move on, and while you guys are tasting, we'll talk about some of the characteristics of winter beers. Again, I think I mentioned it's typically a strong beer or a big beer, stronger alcohol, it's hopped, sometimes higher, a lot of complexity in the flavor. They're often a more malty beer. Additional fermentation characteristics could be honey, molasses, maple syrup, brown sugar, all the things that are fun to put into a nice winter warmer. Often darker in color. Spice additions are common and typically medium to full body. We're not looking for a beer that's going to quench your thirst or that's going to, be the beer that you sip by the pool. I mean, this is the beer you sip by the fireplace. And the other thing that's important is that there really are no hard and fast rules. I mean, you have a lot of flexibility. You don't have to adhere to any specific rules on this style of beer. Love English beers. And we have another one, but I'll let you guys enjoy this one because I don't think it's even made it around yet, right? So, everybody get it? Did it make it to the back row yet? Okay, all right. Well, I'll slow it down a bit. So for the UK, that's a pretty strong beer, and the UK, you go over there and it's like you get a best bitter or like an ordinary bitter. It's 3.5%, 4%. I mean, when the Brits started making IPAs, it was like 5.5% or 5%. So for them to make a beer that's 6%, that would definitely be a strong ale. English beers for me, that's what got me started homebrewing, was English beers. My buddy Dave and I traveled to the UK a number of times, and when I first tasted beer over there, I couldn't believe how much different it was than what we had in the States. And every time I would come back, I would try to find beer that tasted like what I was tasting in the UK, and it just wasn't there. And then I learned that I could make beer, and so I started making English beers. So has everybody got this one? So, what? No, I'm sorry. Everybody have the Fuller's Winter Welcome, which is like an absolute classic. I think this is a really, really beautiful beer. So how fast can we get the next one out? Do you need help? Do we need a second? So there's 6 cans of this one, so it should go around fairly quick. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the brewers are pretty specific on what they will put on the website. The Anderson Valley Solstice, Winter Solstice, is their take on a winter warmer. They say it has rich mouthfeel and a creamy finish, hints of toffee, spice, and caramel. However, they don't say anything about spices that they would have added to the beer. So it's anybody's guess if they do put spices in the beer. They do identify that it uses 2-row, crystal, 40 and 80, Munich 20, and oat flakes. And they do specifically call out Northern Brewer and Chinook. I like how they say it pairs with a fireplace. Thank you. So do you guys detect any spices? Spicy notes? What do you think of this one? Is it similar to the Fuller's Winter Welcome, do you think? It's a little stronger, right? 6.9? Yeah. Still really good, though. And it's actually reasonably priced, too. They're very similar, aren't they? Yeah. I like the fact that it pairs well with a fireplace as well. You know, just, again, that's right off their website. Sorry. So I made my first foray into Total Wine, San Marcos, and I was really enjoying the selection, but I had to keep it to 5, right? So, no, I had to keep it to 5. So these are beers that I've had before, all of them, and I really thought that they would be fun to, share as examples of winter wine. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite categories, which is in the it's in the spice beer category, but it's specific to the winter beers or Christmas beers. Years ago, the spiced ale category was just beer with spices. Then they added subcategories, and they said, okay, some beers are specific to the winter holidays, some beers are not. And I used to have a lot of success entering my spiced ale in competition because nobody was putting coffee, or not coffee, but vanilla or cocoa or all those other things in beer. Well, once that started to take off, nobody seemed to care about my holiday spice beer. So, but anyway, so for aroma, there's a wide range of aromatics. A lot of the examples would be similar to Christmas cookies, all the things that you would think of, gingerbread, spruce trees, that kind of thing. Hop aromatics are often absent, or for sure they're subdued. There could be fruit character, dried fruits, citrus, raisins. The alcohol aromatics should be restrained. Overall, the aroma should be balanced and harmonious. The appearance should be, usually it's medium amber to dark. Doesn't have to be, but it's typical for it to be. And it's always clear, not a hazy. Darker versions are opaque. And it should have a well-formed head, often like off-white or tan. So on the flavor side, and again, this is right out of the BJCP, a lot of creative interpretations, spices associated with the holiday season, rich, malty, sweet, malt-based flavors. Dried fruit could be there. A lot of times special ingredients could be added. Honey, brown sugar, molasses. Bitterness and hot flavors generally restrained, and again, finishes full and satisfying. So the body is usually medium to full. Carbonation should vary, but it's typical to be, in the medium range. And a lot of examples will show aging, warming alcohol content, of course. And the overall impression is just a dark, strong, spiced beer that's often has, a lot of body and a warming finish, and the balance is really key. I think that's what makes the beer approachable, drinkable, and enjoyable. So I think we will probably have another example here. Yes, Deschutes. So, and Deschutes, again, they're giving us more specifics, like what the malt is. It's telling us exactly what malts they use. It's telling us the hops that they use, and it's telling us the fact they're saying it's a festive winter strong ale, but it's robust, and it has a character of toffee and dusted cocoa. I don't think they add those things to the beer. I think it's just the malt. So we'll have to discern if we think they've added anything. But again, I think this is one of those beers where it's just the malt and how they brew it, and the different malts and how they interact with in the boil. They say this is an original since 1988. So the whole idea here is to get warm. All these beers are going to warm us up. So this one's definitely a little different than the last, I think. Anybody think they added any spices to it? I don't think so. Again, these were good values. All of these beers were around $10 for a six-pack, which I thought was really, really nice. The Fuller's a little more expensive. You're buying a larger bottle. But, yeah, $10 for a six-pack, not bad. So. So here's just some photos of some classic examples. Some of these beers may or may not still be available, but you'll recognize, for sure you're going to recognize the Anchor Hour Special Ale. They've been making that beer for a really, really long time. Nils Oscar is, I think that's from Iceland. Goose Island, Harpoon. Uh-oh. Am I doing something wrong? Oh, there we go. I was already there. It looked like this previous slide. So here's some more examples. So Trogs is a British winter warmer. Lakefront is, I think they're in like Wisconsin or something like that. Great Lakes. And then Sam Smith's, we already had that one. Okay, so the next one we're going to do is Anchor. Now this is a real interesting beer for a number of reasons. Yes, go ahead. Oh, that's coming. So I started making beer in 1994. So this year would be my 28th year brewing my holiday beer. And it's changed a few times over the years, and I'll talk about that because we're going to taste mine as well. The Anchor Christmas Ale, they've been making this for 48 years. Longer than I have. I've only been doing it 28 years. 48 years they've been brewing this beer. It's always a darker spiced beer. They change the recipe. Every year they change the recipe. The other thing that, oh, I'm sorry? Oh yeah, I was going to say, well, yeah. Lauren just took my next bullet. So yeah, they change the recipe and they also change the label. Every year it's a different tree. It's hand drawn. Again, from their website, these are their words specifically. They say it's a rye-forward ale that showcases notes of orange, honeysuckle, toasted malts, and eucalyptus. Now, they didn't add eucalyptus, I'm sure. Well, maybe they did, because they do add spices to this beer. And I should mention, too, that this beer was always around 5 to 5.5%. In 2020, I think they realized that with COVID, they better kick the alcohol volume up a little bit. So it's now 7%. This year, I think it's 7.2. So in 2020 was the first year that it went up. But it used to be 5.5%. Corey. I believe it does. I believe it does. So Anchor, for sure, the Anchor Steam Beer has Northern Brewer in it. I'm pretty sure it does. Has anybody been to Anchor? The place is fantastic. It really is. So some people love this beer, some people hate it. And every year it does change. Yes? Well, I would think for sure it would. We would go
repeat
with.
Repeat the question.
The question is, what foods would these beers pair with? Fruitcake. I would think any of your traditional holiday treats. I mean, things that you would certainly expect to be consuming with beer. I mean, ice cream would be good with this, I think. I don't know. I love ice cream and beer. But, no, there's probably most of your holiday favorites. I never really thought about that, though, honestly, so Good question. Anybody else have any ideas? Good food, Scotch? You had a question back? Nope? Oh, okay, great, thanks. All right, moving along. So we'll talk a little bit about spices because that's really a common thing for holiday beers. And beers have been using spices for a really long time. Before the widespread use of hops, they were coming up with a variety of different botanicals to try to counteract the sweetness of the malt. And hops, spices was one of the things that we're successful with. Spices would include potentially spruce, ginger, ground ivy, sweet Mary, pansy, sage, wormwood, and sweet gale. That's what all of those pictures are. And here's a nice big list of spices that you could use. So some of the thoughts about using spices are if you use the fresh spices, you're going to be better off. I mean, whenever possible, try to use fresh ground spices and only use pre-ground ingredients as a last resort. I will say that I do use some pre-ground spices, but only for the very small spice additions. But you can see up there a lot of the ones that you would equate with Christmas would be cinnamon, ginger, cloves, allspice, nutmeg, maybe juniper berries, but for sure spruce, that shows up. Anise often shows up in Belgian beers. Some of the spices on the right might be used in some other styles of beer, but certainly the ones on the left, I think, kind of fit more into the holiday spices. All right, time for another beer. So the Belgians sure know how to make holiday beers. St. Bernardus is, it's a strong Belgian. This one is probably a quadruple. Clocks in about 9.8%. This is from their website. It says aniseed notes. It says hints of creamy caramel and fire-roasted chestnuts. Finish of dried fruits and chocolate. And a little-known fact, St. Bernardus, which is right on the border of France, for many, many years, produced the beers for West Vleteren. And I think it was in the early 70s that they stopped producing the beers for West Vleteren, and they moved that brewery to St. Sixtus Monastery. Was a better value. Yes, I know, it's weird. You don't normally see St. Bernardus coming out of a can, but it was a way better value, so. And I think the beer tastes just the same. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of cans. Big fan of cans, especially when I go camping. So this is a classic. St. Bernardus is a really, really fun place to visit if you've not been there. They have a really, really nice brewery guest house there. So you can spend the night. And they open up the cabinet. We never made it to dinner because we had beer and cheese. We couldn't find any way out of the place. Plus, every single beer they made was available for you. So highly recommend a visit to St. Bernardus. Isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I was really shocked to see that. right, so let's talk a little bit about considerations when you're making your holiday beers. It's, like I said earlier, it's generally a big beer. Make a yeast starter or repitch on a yeast cake. Make sure that you oxygenate. These are all the things that you would normally do if you're making a high gravity beer. For sure, you need to watch your fermentation temperature. Consider reducing the amount of bittering hops, as spices will add bitterness. That's a big deal. It's really kind of more dependent on how long the spices are in the boil, and we'll get to that in a minute because there's a lot of ways that you can add spices to your beer. You don't necessarily put them in the boil. Late addition hops may conflict with the spices you've chosen, and Andy, you may or may not remember, but many years ago we did a vertical of this beer, and you asked me, do you have a late hop addition? I said, as a matter of fact, I do. And you said, I detected that in the newest version of the beer that you poured. You might want to consider nixing that late hop addition. And I've never had a late hop addition since. And the beer has been better as a result. So, and then you want to select a yeast strain that's compatible with the spices that you're using. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So there's a number of ways that you can put spices into the beer. You can add them directly to the boil kettle. You can add them at the tail end of the boil, or you can let them steep at the end of the boil. The thing about spices is once you put them in, you can't take them out. So you have to be really, really careful about overdoing it. And a lot of American beers, a lot of American spiced ales are way overspiced. So if you're you can also boil your spices separately in a small amount of water and make kind of a spiced tea, and then you can add that back in until you get the desired level of spicing. And then the last option is that you can make a tea or like a tencher, right? And add it directly to your boiling or your bottling bucket. And then some people actually will make a tencher with alcohol. I don't recommend that. I think that extracts some undesirables in the spices, but it is an option. You need to be really, really careful because a little goes a long way, and some spices can be quite strong, especially the spice that you guys selected, which clove is insanely powerful. And some of my very earliest versions of my holiday beer did have clove, but allspice also has that clove note to it. So I took the cloves out a long time ago. So this is my recipe for this year. I've done many batches over the years, and I was doing 10-gallon batches, but last year I did a 5-gallon batch, and this year I did a 5-gallon batch. And I tell you, 5-gallon brew days are a lot easier. Plus, you know, with COVID, who was really drinking the beer? So I didn't need to make that much. So my recipe, the base style is a strong Scotch ale. Interesting story behind that. The first time I made this beer in 1994, I was using the Y-yeast smack packs. Anybody remember those? And I had Edinburgh yeast in a Y-yeast smack pack. My house was cold. The one place in the house where the temperature was kind of constant was the oven. And so I put my smack pack in the oven, and I woke up on brew day and I smelled cinnamon rolls. And I said to my wife, I said, did you take my yeast out? She said, what yeast? So I had to go back to the homebrew store and buy another smack pack. They didn't have any more of the Scotch ale yeast. So I ended up with the Belgian yeast strain, the Trappist. So for about 10 years, I used the Trappist ale yeast. And my base beer was a Belgian dark strong. The problem was that and it took me a while to figure this out, but the Belgian yeast imparts so many spices that they were conflicting with the spices that I was adding to the beer. So I was ending up with spices fighting with spices. So I went to a neutral yeast, and I went to a strong Scotch ale base. And for many, many years, I used Edinburgh, the 028, which is the one you guys, or somebody else, for the strong Scotch ale. Well, 2 years ago, I started using the Safel 04. I'm getting the same results. I really am. It's a clean yeast, and this beer is not about the yeast. This beer is about a clean malt profile with spices added. So there's the recipe, and again, it's exactly half of what I would use for a 10-gallon batch. I mix up the hops. The hops don't really matter that much. It's really just there to provide a little bit of bittering for the beer. And why don't you go ahead and start pouring that one? It's the 2 little half or quart-sized growlers. Yes. No, so I'm zesting. And I have used the dried orange peel before, but that's more bitter, and I like the fresh orange peel. So I just take 3 to 4 oranges and zest those. So anyway, again, I said on the hops, I'm really just looking for AAUs. I'm not looking for any specific flavor. Oh. So this beer, I brewed it, I think, at the end of October, and it was in the fermenter for 2 weeks, and I kegged it in early November. Clocks in at 9.2%. Last year's was 9.5%. I don't know what changed, but pretty much the same. And I've been really, really happy with this recipe for obvious reasons. I actually am considering maybe not putting the spices into the boil, maybe only for the last 5 minutes. But I think really what it comes down to is you got to be careful that you don't overspice the beer. So I think that's about it for that one. Oh, I'm going to show you some photos while you're enjoying this beer. So that's my old setup, really, really bad setup. Lots of getting up and down off of step ladders for that one. Mash tun running off into the kettle. This is a updated version of that. No more ladders, no more stuff way up on a stool. So here I'm transferring the Sparge water into my corny keg, because I use a corny keg as my Sparge reservoir. And this is called a power Sparge, where you push the Sparge water with the CO2 tank. There's the hops with the little fly Sparge. And that's the cheap hop spider. So then now I'm a little more sophisticated. I have a pump and a plate chiller. And I recirculate the wort back into the boil kettle until I get down below 100 degrees, and then I go from there into the fermenter. Still using glass. I mean, I don't know why, but I'm still using glass. This is what happens when you've been brewing for 28 years. And then this is my high-tech fermentation temperature control. If I keep that water at 60 degrees, that beer's going to stay at 68. And that's about it for me, I think. I did mention that we have a surprise, right? Oops. Yes. This beer has only been kegged for about a month. Yeah. Uh-oh. What the heck? All right, help. Save me, I pressed too many buttons. No, we have a surprise. This is your surprise. Matt has a gift for us.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Ran into Chuck here the other night at comedy night, and in this room, with several people that are also in this room, and he mentioned that he was doing a presentation on holiday beers, and a lot of things came together, right? I just happened to have a fantastic holiday beer left over from last year because I bought two, and two was too many. And I wanted to be able to share it with everybody here. And I had recently been listening to an audiobook while I was working that discussed this very beer and St. Fouillien's master brewer, Alexis Briol's philosophy when it comes to spicing beer. Now, Belgian beer is a beautiful thing, but Belgian holiday beer it's the best, at least to me. All the different Belgian beers, each one of their breweries, they do a holiday beer every year. And it's just a phenomenal time of year. You can taste all sorts of different flavors. And St. Fouillien's is one of my favorite. They're from a little town called Leroux. It's about 30 minutes southwest of Brussels. And one of the things that they are known for is they actually spice all of their beers. But in the discussion with their head brewer on this, in this book that I was reading, their whole philosophy is trying to spice the beer, but not actually have it seem like the beer is spiced. So a lot of the approaches that they take are they only steep the spices, and they use very, very small quantities. And when they're using the spices, they actually lower their fermentation temperatures so that their yeast are not kicking off as many phenols or esters that would conflict with the spices. So you end up with very, very interesting mixes of all these different flavors that come across as very spiced, but you can't really tell what the spices are. This is last year's. As Sean makes his way around the room, I can see that the bottle is not even halfway gone, so. Yeah. Short pour Sean. But one of the great things about the book that I was doing, that I was listening to, because it was audiobook while I was working, it was Secrets of Brewmasters, and it goes through all these different brewmasters that brew their very specific styles, and they put out homebrew recipes to replicate their style. And this happened to show up, and reminded me that I should bring this here, so. Yep. And I believe Chuck put up the actual recipe for this on the next slide. So it's a fairly intense homebrew recipe, and you can either get this in that book, or there was a link that I sent out to Chuck that was to a blog that quoted all of this out of that book. So it is from their head brewer, Alexis Briol, and this is scaled down to a homebrew size. So there are several recipes in that book that are really interesting, but this one that's the beer that you're drinking here. So it all came together, and I figured I had to share this with everybody here.
Thank you so much, Matt. Any questions for Chuck? Any more questions? All right. So here's to Chuck. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and some really, really tasty beers. Cheers, mate. Thank you.